Okay, so great initial state of the technology lecture, Dr. Cheskes, and comments on the panel.
I love the panel. I would have liked to have been in there. I forgot about joining into the panel piece, but hey, listen, the guys were fantastic. Everyone answered, and you can see there's a consistency amongst concerns amongst the panelists about where we're at now and where we need to be. And I mentioned just backstage, Tom and I sort of come from the same sort of cloth, I think, in terms of we really focus on quality, we focus on systems, we focus on the importance of being able to transmit data, to train, and now getting this concept to me of the community being involved. So I think that was just touched upon a little bit in the discussion, but I think that's the future to me of community response, particularly in rural areas. And I think that's a big area of my research now that I'm focusing on is how do we get more equitable response in communities to cardiac arrest. We struggle so much in communities because call volumes are lower. So how are we going to get the same care to those people as we give to people in rural areas? And I think this is where the concept of community responder programs, certainly for me was the beginning of my concept, or the idea of the drone program was to try to make the field more equitable. And EMS systems are just areas that you can't get to in a timely manner. So you need to think outside the box, but also I think be critical about what we're doing right now. And I think Tom again brought this up, like, we are seeing a too low number of AEDs being used, despite the fact that AEDs are within 500 meters. Most times that's inside 100 meters of people who are actually responding. Like that just can't happen if we want to have a system that's going to actually improve survival from cardiac arrest. So it's complicated. And I think the good thing is realizing that we can do better and thinking about ways that we can do better that will benefit the patients in our communities.
Absolutely. Now, this session is Q&A, so please enter your questions, comments in the Q&A box. I am going to carry over some of the themes that were in the chat from the previous session, though. One of the things that was brought up is this whole size or this whole issue of size and the trade-off between the size of the defibrillator and the size of the battery. And there was some discussion about some of the smaller devices coming over. I think it was Mark from Indianapolis,
yeah,
if I'm recalling correctly, mentioned that some of these AEDs are rated for 200 shocks, which would, as he pointed out, need to be a pretty refractory case to require 200 shocks. But how many shocks would be an appropriate thing to try to put into the device to balance this portability versus service life issue? Because that seems to be the rate limiting factor, at least in from my perspective. I'm not sure though.
Yeah. You guys want to take that one? Or I got some of my own thoughts, but maybe Tom or John want to comment.
No, go ahead, Dr. Sheldon.
Yeah. So to me, small is great, but they got to be durable. So I've worked with some small defibrillators and they're easy to break. Do you know what I mean? That's that, and they're expensive. So when you make them small, I won't say the company, but we used it in part of our drone program, and it didn't withstand what we needed it to withstand, despite the fact that it was small and simple. I think where you're going to go with this, Mick, this is the future, and this is being already done by some startups in Europe. You're going to get disposable defibrillators. You're going to get pocket-sized defibrillators that are able to give 3 shocks, and then you're going to be able to dispose of them. The cost, this is already in the works. And think about it from an AED point of view. How many shocks do you generally use from a public access defibrillator? Rarely do you get more than 3 shocks off. And the cost will be a fraction of what you see the cost for defibrillator companies. Now, I know all the big defibrillator companies don't want to hear this, but that you are going to see that. There are definitely startups in Europe that are looking at that. So they've realized that to look at trying to make things smaller and simpler, you need to be able to have something that's durable, but also meets the needs of what an AED needs to meet, right? So if you got something like the defibrillator manufacturers right now, yeah, they're bigger, they're more durable, they're going to give you more shocks, and they're more suited to the public access defibrillation programs right now. But if we really want to make a difference and get it into the hands of a lot of people, this idea of a disposable defibrillator, one that gives a small number of shocks but is very small, I think it's quite alluring, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we do have a comment from Daniel Moorbacher in Yakima, and makes the point about a lower target cost, and then maybe there's a cost to refresh the battery. But that brings up another aspect of this systems approach, if you will. And I'm curious if any of you have had this experience in your systems, or I've heard of others perhaps doing it. But I always thought that the AED owner needs to be part of the celebration with a cardiac arrest attempt, and not even just the saves. The fact that their AED was put into use, I think should be celebrated and recognized regardless of the outcome. And the other thing that occurred to me is maybe something where the system, in appreciation of the AED owner making that device available to the community, the system does something with replacing the pads and, checking the batteries, those sorts of things. Have any of you run into programs like that?
Tom?
Well, yeah, I mean, we do that. If you use, I mean, obviously, if it's one of the ones that were placed by the town's AED program, part of that is we replace pads.
Right.
And so sometimes we're able to hand them a set of pads at the scene, really. But, the other thing that we had to learn is there were occasions where if we arrived on scene, our crew and a town-owned AED or something was at the patient's side, it's like, oh, wait, don't, as we're cleaning up the scene and doing stuff, we have to figure out where did this come from and where does it belong, kind of make sure that it's still okay, and then put it back where it's supposed to be. And so a lot of these are just little things that you end up fine tuning as your AED program matures. But I think it's a great sentiment to say, hey, you know what? Use an AED to save a life, get a free set of pads. Absolutely. Regardless of what the manufacturer is, if we've got to call an obscure company and find you a set of pads, no problem. Here's a loaner while we're waiting for it. We'll trade you back as soon as the pads come in. I think it's we owe them that, just like we owe people that do bystander CPR that might have been a little bit traumatized, to debrief them, give them closure, let them know the outcome, let them know we appreciate them and what they've done. We give them a department challenge coin and a nice letter from the fire chief. So I think we can do a much better job with our bystanders and anybody that deploys a publicly available AED, including the AED owner. I agree 100%. Great idea.
Yeah, because I'm concerned that, a lot of potential AED owners, particularly small business owners, et cetera, are a little bit spooked by the liability issues, the maintenance issues. What's my, long-term cost going to be? Maybe they have, a generous spirit one day when they're going through Costco and they go ahead and grab one and put it in their store, but, does it get maintained, et cetera? And I think if we can establish a culture in the business community, perhaps even partnering with the Chamber of Commerce to kind of address these misconceptions that I think a lot of small business owners or enterprises may have about AED ownership and what's necessary to put them in place, could maybe get some traction. It would form another interesting public-private partnership.
John, how is it in your area?
Well, in Florida, it's kind of diverse. I mean, we have a lot of communities like the Villages, and and those that have programs that are either run by the agency or run by a civilian group that's, a partner with the agency. We also have a lot of other retirement communities, similar to what Tom was talking about earlier, that, have security guards, and the security services have AEDs, and they do continuous training. One of my biggest issues with all of this is that a lot of times we get these AEDs out in the public, and we don't do repetitive training with these people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good way for an agency to partner with these providers. You have these organizations that are putting AEDs out in your community, partner with them and help them understand and help provide not only the education, but like Tom said, replacement of pads. Where do they get them? How do they get them? How often should they replace them? Can't tell you how many times I've, been someplace, popped open the defibrillator box, a little buzzer goes off, I get in trouble, but I look at the pads and the pads are expired.
Yeah.
And that leads me to believe, when was the last time the batteries were checked? So, there's a lot to do. I mean, when you're talking about an airport, or you're talking about a security service for a retirement community, they're generally pretty good. It's other community services, like Mick was saying, where it ends up at a bodega, or it ends up at a beauty salon where an owner has agreed to put one in. How is that maintained? And I think the department has to have some sort of responsibility to sit with that citizen and help with the maintenance and help with the monitoring of that process.
Yeah, a couple comments in the Q&A and the chat. Daniel again is making a point about Europe having a cell phone type, opening up 911 equivalent. And it's not clear to me, though, Daniel, if what you're talking about is this built into the AED, where you open the AED or activate the AED, that it opens up the channel? Perhaps you can maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, actually, I think I know what he's talking about. So
Okay.
let me make a couple comments, Mick. First of all, one of the issues with registries and regionalization of pad care is it's oftentimes very fractionated. So you have a service, you have an EMS service, you have private. So no one is sharing that information unless you have a global sense of where the defibrillators are. So oftentimes when we first started this, we went to the manufacturers and we told them, hey, you tell us whoever you sell a defibrillator to, by law, they must tell us where that defibrillator is. And many were spooked, as you said, because they got the defibrillator, but were worried, is there going to be any blowback if something, a liability issue came up? So you need to ensure as best possible that everything is under one roof and that the care provided under that roof is consistent. So I think that's really key, the monitoring, etc. Tom brought up a great point. There's no question in my mind. The technology will be there. There's new smart cabinets, code savers, where we will monitor all this remotely. It's not going to be someone going to these and checking them. You will get a signal that your pads are due, your batteries due. This is all easy technology. So Tom hit it right on the head. That's coming. We are now doing. In our area, we're doing a study looking at our community responder program, where we use a community responder. So we've trained professional responders. So our usual response right now is 911 call, police, EMS, fire, go to the call. But we've trained now, we're just over 100 trained community responders, where we equip them with an app known as First AED, as well as a defibrillator. So that when in a community, the call is within their area, because we have the GPS, the First AED app tells them, one, where the cardiac arrest is, they respond it, they accept it, and they go to that area with their defibrillator. So that's getting the community responder involved in that. And that's really a true community responder program. What was brought up by Mark in that question, in Europe, are their classic community responder programs, where they have an app, in the Dutch of Norway's done this, Denmark's done this, Amsterdam's done this very, very well. The app shows you where the GPS location of the cardiac arrest is, but also on the app, what you'll see is where the closest defibrillator is to that cardiac arrest. So the person who has the app, generally in the app we use, one goes to do CPR, one goes to pick up the AED. So that's sort of the thinking behind that process. Very, very good. We're taking it another step forward by actually equipping our providers with the AED. So then we know that we have a trained provider going there. One of the tricks of doing this one with the app where they show you where the defibrillator is you're not sure that that person's actually trained or knows how to use the AED. So that's been a downfall of some of that piece. We think our process is likely better because we know exactly who these are trained under our organization. Pulse Point has a similar process, and it's called CPR approved, so they know, or provider approved, so they know that these providers know how to use an AED, and they've got a similar type of process. So all these techniques are doing the same thing. They're trying to get your community involved to provide defibrillation at the earliest time possible, allow the providers to know where the defibrillator is in their region at the earliest time possible. So they're all the same concept. Most of them are certainly early on right now. Europe has much more published data than we have, but we're going to start catching up right now, though. And I think it'll be interesting to see the impact of these programs.
With that information, though, Dr. Cheskes, is there any choreography done by the app as far as trying to prevent, say, two citizens get the notification on the app? They both see where the arrest is. They both see where the AED is. And they both go to the patient. One doesn't go to the AED, one doesn't go to the patient. Is there any choreography of that?
So in the app that we use, yes, we say, we'll take up to 3 responses. So one says you go do CPR, the other goes you bring your defibrillator. So everyone has a choreographed job to do. And it's certainly, you're right, 100% you want to make sure that someone gets the AED. You can do so much CPR as you want. Eventually, you need to defibrillate the patient. So, yes, there is choreography in this. They're quite sophisticated now. You'd be quite impressed. The concern that was raised about this, and the reason we train these own people is you didn't want to have the signal going out to tons of people who may have no interest in cardiac arrest or responding. It was a big concern of Pulse Point early on in terms of privacy issues. People, you remember, a lot of times now you're going into a private home. I remember when they presented it in Europe, once at AHA, and they presented this concept. And in Europe, they said, yeah, we have people come into the homes with the defibrillators. And then they actually said, the question at AHA was, can you do this in the US? And she goes right away, the speaker goes, we don't live in the US. Okay, so there was this fear of walking into someone's house in the USA where you didn't have that pre-notification. So different mindset. Europe, USA was a two different kettle of fish. But I think Pulse Point has now developed a technique where this can be done with people who are trained providers. So these are all new ways to improve the system as far as I'm concerned. And I think they will make a difference because I think we just need to get to more cardiac arrests where they're more commonly happening, and that's in private locations. If we don't do that, you're not going to move the needle on survival through PAD programs alone, for sure. And then you've seen this, any paper you see, you can't see a big improvement in survival because you just don't get to enough of them in areas where patients are going to make a difference and where we're going to make a difference. So that's the system piece anyway.
Yeah, there was one of the items in the chat or the questions, I forget which it was, but they were talking about the nomenclature. Tom, what are your thoughts about this nomenclature issue? Should we continue to call them AEDs? Is the public pretty habituated to think of them as AEDs, or do we have a branding issue here with people not knowing what an AED is?
Yeah, I think we probably do. I mean, I noticed when I was in the UK doing ride-alongs with the London Ambulance Service, they refer to them as defibs. So that seems a little more descriptive. But I think Mark was saying now they call them heart restarters, which I think is, I mean, I can't argue with that. It's like it asks a question and it gives the answer. What do I need this for? To restart the heart. That's exactly why we want them to use it. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'll be interested to see if they're successful with the rebranding. I really don't have a strong intuition one way or the other.
You know, I've always been fascinated by the notion of getting marketing and psychosocial behaviorists.
You mean like the jaws of life?
For that. But dealing with the psychosocial issues of barriers to doing CPR, it seems to me that, you know, in corporate America, they have, you know, refined their marketing techniques so much that in a grocery store, there's certain things they do to make you turn right rather than left, look up rather than look down. And I'd like to see some of that expertise applied to, you know, encouraging people to step out from the crowd and start bystander CPR, to use AEDs and address these psychosocial barriers to implementation. Because we've all seen these, you know, videos on YouTube and other stories where there's a crowd of people all, you know, surrounding this person laying in the middle of the mall or the flea market, whatever the case may be, and no one steps out.
Yeah, so the psychosocial piece is huge, and my colleague who runs our community program, Paul Snowball, who often speaks about this, published some good work, because he really interviews all these revivers after events and gets their feedback. It's amazing how they respond to cardiac arrest, their anxieties, their successes. It's really important, because I think what he gets back is very good to give back to industry, to say, hey, these are what the providers provided in terms of feedback. So you may think you're making your defibrillator as easy as possible, but here's what they said when they had to use it in a real life situation. That's really, really powerful stuff. In terms of the psychology, I found it very interesting, the World Cup issue with Ericsson's cardiac arrest in the World Cup game, and how people said, why are they showing this and why shouldn't they show this, and the back and forth. To me, seeing a life saved by an AED in a real life event by a sports celebrity or a sports soccer player, that does a lot. Like, that says to me, if I was watching that, I didn't know anything, I thought that was really powerful, that people say, hey, look at that, CPR, a shock was provided, and this young man is now going to live, whereas he wasn't previously. To me, you can't get anything better than that psychologically. I was a bit surprised when people say, well, why are they showing that? You know, I think that one event like that can have a huge impact on people taking CPR courses, learning how to use an AED. I think those are all really, really important. So, yeah, I think the psyche part is a big, big deal. And it's been forever. That's something, Mick, I think all of us in resuscitation have faced over the years. Simplicity of using an AED, people doing CPR, we're way better now. You know, in terms of Toronto area, our bystander CPR rates are way higher. Seattle obviously is phenomenal. There's plenty of pockets of superb bystander CPR in North America and across the world. So I think we have made progress, no question. I always get turned off by papers who say that cardiac arrest survival is this and it hasn't gone up in 30 years. That's nonsense. There's plenty of jurisdictions who have done phenomenal work, have taken the lessons learned that we've talked about today, and have saved more lives. So we're getting there. What we're doing now is we want to fine tune this. We want to make it even better so we save more lives. So I think that's part of what this conference is about to me is, hey, technology is great, but we want to save more lives in the end of the day. And how do we make it as easy as possible for the public to do that?
Yeah, and this, you know, kind of brings up this whole notion. We have, you know, the basic science of understanding what fibrillation is, what causes it, et cetera. We have the clinical science of how to treat it, but we have improvement science on how to tweak the process. But part of that is this notion of implementation science, which I think we're very, very weak on.
Yeah, in general, we are. And I think whenever you write grants in resuscitation, the grant reviewers now, they all want to know about how you're going to implement this, right? So you may have a great idea. If you can't implement it, how is it going to make a difference? Is it not, if it's not feasible, how is it going to make a difference? So I think the implementation of some of this is critically important, because again, if you can't implement, you're not going to make a difference.
Yeah, and just as kind of a parting thought to think about, some of the people may not be old enough to remember this particular commercial, but back in the 60s in the US anyway, I don't know if they had a similar thing in Canada, Dr. Cheskes, but there was a commercial about littering, and it was of an American Indian standing on the side of the road, and somebody was driving by on the highway, and they, just carelessly threw out some trash at the window, and it lands at the feet of the Native American standing there. And the camera zooms in, dramatic music, and you just see a tear coming down the corner of the eye.
Iron Eyes Cody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the impact of that commercial was remarkable because, prior to that, it was very common for people to littering, but it kind of sent out the message that it's not socially acceptable
Mm-hmm.
to just throw garbage out the window. And, what I'd like to see is something similar where it's not socially acceptable to just let someone,
Yeah.
sit there without CPR, without trying to save a life. So that's where I'd really like to see some of our colleagues in marketing and behavioral science, behavioral economics. There's a number of different disciplines that I think might have something to bring to the table on this. So as has been happening with a lot of these sessions, some questions from the attendees, kind of an extension of the panel discussion, but it's all good dialogue, all useful information for everybody. We're going to go ahead and break now for 30 minutes while we have the official break in the conference. And just as a reminder, take advantage of this to network in the lounge, visit the suppliers at their booths, and really leverage the opportunity to advance your purchasing decision process with the break. And we'll see you all in the lounges, and then we'll rejoin with Dr. Cheskes again, discussing ventilation. Thanks, everybody.
Great session.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so
Take
much.
care.